Well, I cleaned up the valve cover assembly so that it will make a good seal when I put the gasket maker on the head. And while I was down here, I was looking at this little plug that goes in the end here, and I was wondering if that O-ring had come in the kit from Wonderosa. And while I was looking in the kit, I saw this big O-ring and realized that I had forgot to put this O-ring in. And this O-ring goes on the base of the cylinder. So in addition to the cylinder base gasket, there's also an O-ring that goes underneath there. And I was tempted to just rely on the base gasket and the RTV sealant that I put on that gasket to see if it would seal. But I checked on a couple of Yamaha ATV forums, and the general consensus was it was probably a bad idea to leave this out and that I should put this in. So unfortunately, that means all the work I've done so far in reassembly is going to have to be undone, because I can't get the cylinder off without taking the head off. I can't get the head off without taking the camshaft off, which I just went through all the trouble of timing. So, oh well, live and learn. And then the other issue was the cylinder head gasket. I had torqued that down, and it's not a good idea to, once it's been torqued down once, it's not a good idea to retorque it down. But in this case, I am going to reuse the cylinder head gasket and take my chances with it. Mainly because the general OEM, the genuine OEM cylinder head gasket from Yamaha, price I found online was $55. The Wonderosa top end rebuild kit, which is aftermarket, which is this kit here, which I got for, and it comes with the cylinder head gasket. This was only $35 plus shipping. So it's a no-brainer. If I have to get another cylinder head gasket, I'm just going to buy this whole kit all over again. And it'll be a tremendous waste of extra parts, but hey, you know. So, again, because I'm not sure whether or not that cylinder is in good enough shape to allow those rings to properly do their job, I'm going to put it together this way, see if it runs, see if the rest of the systems on the ATV are working. And if all else is fine and it starts to just smoke from burning oil, then I'll look for an oversized piston kit and bore it out. So that O-ring goes inside here. So I got to take this all apart. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of that whole procedure because I did that in earlier videos. Okay, I just removed the cylinder assembly, and when I removed the cylinder assembly, this dowel actually popped out and then fell out of the bottom. I'm very lucky that that didn't fall into the crankcase, because I might not have even realized that it was missing, and then I might have tried to run the engine with that little piece of metal flying around in there. So I'm going to take it out right now. That also brings up another point that I wanted to mention. When I was looking in the kit, I actually saw that that little rubber seal that's around this dowel is actually in the kit, and there was actually more than one. So I'm going to carefully inspect all of these dowels and see which ones are supposed to have seals on them, and make sure that I install the new seals. Another little item I overlooked is I didn't clean up this surface area. There's actually some remnants of the gasket. This is where the timing chain tensioner goes, and I want to clean that up, and it's going to be a lot easier for me to clean that up with the head off. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, now I've cleaned this up, and now I'm going to install that O-ring that I missed on the first try. It actually slides right down over this and goes in this groove right here. After I realized the mistake I made by missing the O-ring, I decided to pull up the parts breakdown for this assembly and see if there was something else I might be missing. And I noticed that these two special cap screws that hold the cylinder jug down, that they had washers at the base, and I know when I reassembled them I didn't see any washers in my parts because I had kept all the parts together, and the only washers I saw were the ones for the two nuts that go on the outboard side here. And the reason why I didn't see the washers is because they're actually stuck in there. But this one is clearly in place. This one appears to be missing, so I'm going to go look through my hardware and see whether or not I inadvertently missed it. Okay, remember this little dowel that was falling out? Right here, it has that little seal on it. Well, that little dowel plugs in the hole right in the top of the crankcase right there, and that's where that seal came from. Thing is, the Windorosa kit came with 2 of those seals, so I knew there was a second one somewhere. So I had to go figure out where it came from. So I went and looked at the parts breakdown, and it turns out the second one of these seals goes in a dowel on the cylinder head. So, interestingly enough, it was funny because when I was trying to figure out where this went, and I wanted to verify where they were, I looked at the parts breakdown for this quad, and what I found was that on the cylinder assembly, they show the O-ring and the gasket, the base gasket, and the cylinder assembly, but they actually don't even show these studs or the dowel that plugs into this hole or the seal that goes on it. So then I said, oh, it must be on the crankcase. Well, I looked at the exploded view for the crankcase. Guess what? Shows the crankcase, shows the top of the crankcase where the holes are that these studs thread into, doesn't show them. So these dowels right here that slip down over these 2 studs on this side, these 4 studs, the dowel that goes in here, and the seal that goes on that dowel, all do not exist in the parts breakdown for this model for some reason. Maybe on some other websites or parts books it's there, but on the online version on a couple of different vendor sites it didn't show up. So then I googled the part number for this seal and ended up finding the parts breakdown for an XT600, which is very similar to this as far as the way it's all put together, and it has the identical location for this dowel with this identical seal on it, and then it also has, like I said, the one where the on the top of the cylinder where it mates to the cylinder head. So I know that this is going to be the one that goes, one of these is going to go in here, and one I'll show you later. Okay, I reinstalled the cylinder jug, and I decided not to put RTV sealant on this base gasket because you've got the O-ring in there, and the service manual doesn't say anything about using RTV sealant on that gasket. So I'm going to leave it out. I did clean the gasket, and I also cleaned off any remnants of RTV sealant from my first attempt of assembly of this unit off of there. And then the other problem I had was, I was talking about those 2 little dowels. Well, I put the lower one in with the new seal from the Windorosa kit on it, where it's supposed to be under the jug here. And then when I went to put the cylinder head on, I noticed that the dowel was not in the hole. And then I looked at the cylinder head, and it wasn't on the cylinder head. And I quickly realized that I had misplaced it. My fear was that it had fallen out somewhere where I wasn't expecting it to. So I went back and looked at my videos, and I saw that the video I showed of the cylinder, the condition of the cylinder when I first disassembled it, clearly shows the dowel stuck in there. And then the video I took of the cylinder assembly when I came back from the machine shop clearly shows it missing, which made me realize it either fell out in transit to the machine shop or fell out at the machine shop. Well, that was a couple weeks ago that I picked it up, so I thought, well, it's a pretty slim chance I'm going to find it, but just for the heck of it, I'm going to go and see my machinist and talk to him, and I explained to him the situation, and he looked, and whenever he finds miscellaneous hardware that he's not sure where it belongs or falls out of things, he puts it in a little box, and there was nothing in there. But then he said, well, he said, let me check the screen in the jet cleaner, because he had jet cleaned the head. And when he opened up the big drawer that has the screen in it, and it was just full of gasket material and other remnants of the little O-rings and stuff that get blasted about. And he fished through it a little bit with his fingers, and lo and behold, he came up with this dowel. And I was like, could I be that lucky? And he actually thought it wasn't even the right one. It was pretty dirty and messy. And I said, boy, it sure looks like the right size. And then I happened to be looking through the remnants of the stuff in the tray there, and lo and behold, I found the seal that went on it, the original seal. And it was a perfect fit onto the dowel, which led me to believe that this was the correct one. And then I even asked him, I said, well, maybe it came off another motorcycle part. He says he doesn't do a lot of motorcycle stuff. And so that was pretty good. And then came back here with the dowel after I cleaned it up, and it's a perfect fit. So that's my dowel. So you talk about luck. So now I'm going to put the new seal on this dowel from the Windorosa kit and insert this dowel. And then I'm going to install the cylinder head. Okay, now I'm back to the point I was at before I discovered the O-ring was missing. Now I've got everything back together with the O-ring in there. So the next step is I've got to install the valve cover or rocker arm cover assembly, which is right here. The service manual actually recommends applying grease to the tappets or the rocker arms. So I did that. Of course, I've still got a light coat of engine oil on my camshaft and valve train parts. And now a key thing that you have to install at this point before you overlook it is the other half of the guide for the camshaft chain, which actually goes in from this side, and then these pins here on the end of these ears right here just kind of sit down inside there. This is a diagram showing how you apply the sealant before you put the cover on. There's no gasket, it's just sealant, and basically you want to make sure that the bead goes around all of the bolt holes, and even this area here gets a little bit of a bead. Same thing with this here and here. And then the other trick is, when I took this apart, I took all the bolts that go into this cover and I put them all in one container. And there are several size bolts that go back in here. And unfortunately in the service manual, they don't show every single bolt and what size it is. So you're kind of left to try and figure that out for yourself, which you can kind of do. The 3 long bolts, there were 3 extra long bolts. One of the things I did was I went online and I printed a copy of the actual parts breakdown, and it shows the bolts, but it doesn't show all of the bolts. But when you look at the reference number, you can actually look at the parts list and it'll tell you how many are used in the application. So that kind of helps you narrow it down. So for instance, there are 2 bolts that are really long right here, and then another one that's almost as long but a little bit shorter. So what I know about these long bolts is that all 3 of these long bolts all have washers. These are the only 3 bolts that hold that cover on that have the washers. So the 2 long ones that are the same length go right here. The long one that is a standalone goes here. Alright, I've installed the cover, and I'm using the Permatex Ultra Black gasket maker, high oil resistance gasket maker. And the instructions say that, of course, you start with a clean, dry surface, and then you put a bead down, then you immediately assemble the parts, and then you finger tighten all the bolts down just enough so that your compound starts to squeeze out of the flange. So I'm going to check all around and make sure it's squeezing out all around, and then let it cure for 1 hour, and then come back and retighten it. And at that point, when I come back, that's when I'll tighten it to the torque specs. Got to install the timing chain tensioner. What you want to do is put a new gasket on here after you cleaned it up, and you raise this little cam right here on the top, your finger, push that all the way in. Then that gets installed. You want to make sure it goes on the right way. And that's installed with 2 Allen head cap screws, but the service manual actually says that on these 2 screws you want to use Loctite. Okay, after you put the Loctite on and insert these 2 cap screws, they get tightened to 10 Newton meters or 7.2 foot-pounds. Now the spring goes in, and then this washer, crush washer, goes back on this, and this gets compressed down, and then once you screw it in, you tighten it to 20 Newton meters or 14 foot-pounds.